The flashing red and blue lights in my driveway at 7 in the morning told me that Deborah Henderson had finally lost her mind completely. I stood at my front window in boxer shorts and a ratty college sweatshirt, coffee mug halfway to my lips, watching a uniformed officer step out of his patrol car. The temperature outside hovered around 15 degrees, and fresh snow from last night's storm covered everything in a pristine white blanket. Well, almost everything. The massive pile of snow I'd spent 3 hours creating yesterday sat exactly where I'd left it, a monument to my hard work and determination to keep my driveway clear. My name is Ian Bradford, and I'd been living in the Riverside Meadows community in suburban Minneapolis, Minnesota, for exactly 2 years. 2 years of dealing with the most overbearing, nitpicking, power-hungry homeowners association I'd ever encountered. And at the helm of this bureaucratic nightmare stood Deborah Henderson, a 53-year-old woman who treated HOA regulations like they were handed down from Mount Sinai on stone tablets. I threw on jeans and proper shoes, grabbed my winter coat, and headed outside. The officer was already examining my snow pile, which I'd carefully positioned along the property line between my house and the community walking path. The pile stood about 6 feet high and ran for maybe 20 feet, the result of clearing both my driveway and walkway. "Good morning, officer," I said, my breath forming clouds in the freezing air. "I'm Ian Bradford. This is my property." The officer turned, and I saw his nameplate read Martinez. He looked to be in his early 40s with tired eyes that suggested he'd seen it all. "Mr. Bradford, I received a call about an illegal snow pile obstructing public property and creating a safety hazard." "Let me guess. Deborah Henderson." Officer Martinez checked his notes. The caller identified herself as the HOA president. "Yes." I gestured toward the pile. "That snow is entirely on my property. I was very careful about that because I knew this would happen." "You have documentation of your property lines?" "I do. Come inside where it's warm and I'll get everything." As we walked toward my house, I spotted Deborah standing on her porch 3 houses down, arms crossed, watching us like a hawk. She wore her typical uniform, a designer coat that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, perfectly styled blonde hair that defied the winter wind, and an expression that could curdle milk. Inside, I pulled out my property survey from when I'd purchased the house. I'd learned quickly that in Riverside Meadows, you documented everything. The survey clearly showed my property boundaries, which I'd marked with small stakes last fall specifically to avoid disputes about where my land ended and HOA common areas began. Martinez studied the documents carefully. "These stakes still out there, under the snow, but yes, I can show you exactly where." We went back outside and I grabbed a shovel from my garage. The walking path was considered common area maintained by the HOA. My property line ran parallel to it, with about 3 feet of my land between the path and where my actual lawn started. I'd piled the snow entirely within those 3 feet. I cleared snow from where I knew 2 of the stakes were located. Sure enough, they appeared right where they should be, and the snow pile sat completely on my side of them. Martinez took photos with his phone, measured distances, and made notes. "Mr. Bradford, this snow is clearly on your property. You're well within your rights to pile it here." "Thank you, officer. I appreciate you coming out, even though I'm sure you have better things to do." He gave me a slight smile. "Part of the job. I'll let the caller know there's no violation." He paused. "Off the record, I've been out here for HOA complaints 7 times in the past 2 months. Different houses, different issues, but always the same caller. Deborah keeps you busy." That's putting it mildly. He handed me a business card. If you have any more problems, give me a call and keep those property documents handy. After Martinez drove away, I stood in my driveway for a moment, finishing my now cold coffee. Deborah had disappeared from her porch, probably already plotting her next move. Living in Riverside Meadows felt like being in a constant state of siege, where the enemy wore expensive coats and wielded CC&R documents like weapons. My phone rang. It was my neighbor directly to my left, Marcus Chen. "Dude, did Deborah really call the cops on your snow?" "She did." "That woman has officially lost it. Want to grab lunch later? I need to hear this story." "Yeah, let me get showered and finish some work. Noon at Rick's Diner." "Perfect." I went inside, reheated my coffee, and sat down at my home office desk. I worked as a software developer, mostly remote, which meant I was around during the day to witness all of Deborah's shenanigans. It also meant I was home when she decided to do her property inspections, which happened at least twice a month. The HOA rules in Riverside Meadows were extensive. 47 pages of regulations covering everything from acceptable mailbox designs to the exact shade of brown your mulch could be. Grass height restrictions, holiday decoration guidelines, rules about when you could and couldn't put your trash bins out. The list went on forever. I'd bought the house because it was in a great location, close to work before I went remote, with good schools nearby for when my girlfriend Olivia and I decided to have kids. Olivia Bennett didn't live with me yet, but she spent most weekends here. She worked as a nurse at Hennepin County Medical Center and had the patience of a saint, which she needed when listening to my HOA horror stories. At noon, I met Marcus at Rick's Diner, a local institution known for excellent burgers and an owner who had explicitly chosen to never live in a HOA community. Rick himself had told me once that he'd rather live in a cardboard box than deal with that nonsense. Marcus was already in a booth and I slid in across from him. He grinned at me. "So start from the beginning. I want every detail." I recounted the morning's events while we ordered and ate. Marcus shook his head throughout the story. "I don't know how you stay so calm about it." When Deborah tried to fine me for putting my Christmas lights up 3 days before the approved date, I almost lost my mind. Almost. My wife reminded me that Deborah thrives on conflict. Getting angry just feeds her. Your wife is wise. But here's the thing that bugs me. The snow pile isn't even close to being a problem. It's not blocking anything. It's not on the path. It's not creating any kind of hazard. She called the police purely out of spite. Marcus took a bite of his burger. Remember when she called code enforcement on the Johnsons because their fence was half an inch too tall? Or when she tried to fine the Petersons because their kid drew a hopscotch court on their own driveway with washable chalk? My favorite was when she reported Mrs. Kim for having a garden gnome that wasn't on the approved decorative items list. We spent lunch trading war stories about Deborah's greatest hits. The woman had been HOA president for 6 years, running unopposed because anyone who considered challenging her withdrew their candidacy after she launched whispering campaigns, questioning their character and fitness for the position. After lunch, I drove home to find a certified letter from the HOA in my mailbox. I didn't even need to open it to know what it said, but I did anyway. Sure enough, it was a violation notice for unauthorized snow accumulation creating potential safety hazards and diminishing community aesthetics. The fine was $250, with an additional $50 per day until the violation was corrected. I sat in my car and read the letter 3 times. The audacity was breathtaking. A police officer had confirmed I was breaking no laws. The snow was entirely on my property, and yet here was Deborah, attempting to find me anyway. I pulled out my phone and called the number listed for HOA inquiries. Deborah answered on the second ring. Riverside Meadows HOA, Deborah Henderson speaking. Deborah, it's Ian Bradford. I just received a violation notice about my snow pile. Yes, Mr. Bradford. The pile violates Section 12, Paragraph 4 of our community guidelines, which says what exactly? That property maintenance must meet community aesthetic standards. Your snow pile is unsightly. It's snow. It's winter in Minnesota. Everyone has snow piles. Not everyone has piles that large and visible from the street. I took a deep breath. The police confirmed this morning that the snow is entirely on my property and creates no hazard. The HOA has authority over aesthetic issues regardless of legal positioning. The fine stands. I'm not paying it. Her voice went cold. Then it will increase by $50 per day, and eventually we'll place a lien on your property. I suggest you comply, Mr. Bradford. She hung up. I sat there for a long moment, staring at my phone. Then I did what any reasonable person would do in my situation. I called a lawyer. The attorney's name was Sarah Mitchell, and she specialized in HOA disputes. I'd found her number in a local community Facebook group where people shared their HOA nightmare stories. She had a reputation for not backing down. Her secretary scheduled me for an appointment the next afternoon. In the meantime, I documented everything. I took photos of the snow pile from multiple angles, printed out the property survey with clear markings, and made copies of the police report number Officer Martinez had given me. That evening, Olivia came over after her shift. She found me at the kitchen table surrounded by papers, still fuming. "Let me guess," she said, kissing my cheek. "Deborah, she's trying to fine me $250 for the snow pile, plus $50 a day until I remove it." Olivia sat down across from me. "Can she do that?" "That's what I'm going to find out. I have a lawyer appointment tomorrow." "This is getting ridiculous, Ian. Every few weeks it's something new with her. First it was your doormat being the wrong size, then your house numbers weren't the approved font, now this." "I know. Have you thought about just moving? We've talked about getting a place together anyway." I had thought about it many times, but something in me rebelled against the idea of letting Deborah win. I like this house. I like the neighborhood. I like my neighbors except for her. Why should I be the one to leave? Because life's too short to spend it fighting with a crazy HOA president. She had a point, but I wasn't ready to concede defeat. Let me talk to the lawyer first, see what my options are. The next afternoon, Sarah Mitchell's office was in a strip mall near downtown Minneapolis. Her waiting room featured a bulletin board covered with news clippings about HOA horror stories from across the country. It was simultaneously validating and depressing. Sarah herself was in her mid-50s, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She reviewed my documents while I explained the situation. "Okay," she said when I finished. "The good news is you have an excellent case. The snow is on your property, you have documentation, and you have a police report confirming no laws were broken. The bad news is fighting an HOA can be expensive and time-consuming." "How expensive?" "My retainer is $2,000. The case could take months." "Maybe longer if it goes to court." I winced. "That's a lot." "It is, which is why many people just comply even when they're in the right. The HOA knows this, they count on it." She leaned back in her chair. "But here's the thing. I've dealt with Deborah Henderson before. Different client, different issue. She eventually dropped that case when we started requesting detailed financial records and questioning some of the HOA's expenditures." "What kind of expenditures?" "That's privileged information from another client, but I will say this. In my experience, HOA presidents who are this aggressive about minor violations are often compensating for something. Sometimes they're just power hungry. Sometimes they're hiding something. I thought about that. So, what's my first step? I'll draft a response to the violation notice, citing your property rights and the police report. I'll also request detailed documentation of how Section 12, Paragraph 4 has been applied to other properties. If they're selectively enforcing rules, that's a problem for them. And if they don't respond, then we escalate. But let's start here and see what happens. I signed the retainer agreement and wrote a check, my stomach churning at the amount. This was supposed to be money for the engagement ring I'd been planning to buy Olivia. Instead, it was going to fight a petty tyrant over a pile of snow. 3 days later, Sarah sent her letter. 2 days after that, I received a response from the HOA's lawyer, a firm called Patterson and Associates. The letter was predictably condescending, maintaining that the HOA had broad authority over aesthetic issues and that my snow pile violated community standards. But buried in the legal jargon was something interesting. The letter claimed that multiple residents had complained about the snow pile, not just Deborah. I knew this was nonsense. I talked to my immediate neighbors and none of them cared. Marcus had even joked that my pile was smaller than his, so I started going door to door. Over the next week, I spoke with 27 families in Riverside Meadows. Not a single one had complained about my snow pile. Most hadn't even noticed it. Several shared their own Deborah horror stories. The picture that emerged was of a woman who had turned HOA governance into a personal fiefdom, ruling through intimidation and arbitrary enforcement of rules. Mrs. Peterson, whose kid had drawn the hopscotch court, told me Deborah had threatened to fine them for every toy their children left in the yard. She said the neighborhood needed to maintain a sophisticated appearance. I told her kids live here. What did she expect? She just gave me this look like I was dirt on her shoe. Mr. Johnson, with the fence that was half an inch too tall, said Deborah had showed up with a tape measure and measured every panel. The thing is, the fence was installed by the previous owner. It had been there for 8 years. But apparently Deborah just noticed it and decided it was a problem. The more people I talked to, the angrier I became. This wasn't about snow or fences or garden gnomes. This was about one person drunk on petty power, making everyone else miserable. I documented every conversation and passed the information to Sarah. She was delighted. This is great. This shows a pattern of harassment and selective enforcement. Keep digging. So I did. I started attending HOA meetings, which were held monthly in the community clubhouse. The meetings were sparsely attended, usually just Deborah, the treasurer, and maybe 2 or 3 residents who had specific complaints. At the February meeting, I showed up with Marcus and 3 other neighbors. Deborah's face tightened when she saw us, but she called the meeting to order professionally enough. The treasurer's report revealed something interesting. The HOA had spent nearly $15,000 on legal fees in the past year. For a community of just 84 homes, that seemed excessive. "Excuse me," I said during the open comment period. "Can you explain what those legal fees were for?" Deborah's smile was thin. "Various issues requiring legal consultation. Can you be more specific?" "The details are in the minutes for those who care to review them." "I'd like to review them now. What were the issues?" Her face flushed. "Mr. Bradford, if you have concerns about HOA expenditures, you can submit a formal request in writing. I'm asking now during an open meeting." The treasurer, a nervous man named Gary, cleared his throat. "Well, there were several violation disputes that required legal response." "How many?" Gary looked at Deborah, who gave him a sharp look. He fumbled with his papers. Approximately 15 cases. 15 cases in 1 year for a small community like ours. That meant Deborah was pushing violations to the legal stage at an alarming rate. Most HOAs tried to resolve issues informally to avoid legal costs. And how many of those cases resulted in actual fines being collected? I asked. I'd have to check the records, Gary mumbled. Please do. I'll wait. The tension in the room could have been cut with a knife. The other residents who'd come with me were watching with wide eyes. Deborah looked like she wanted to leap across the table and strangle me. Gary spent 10 minutes flipping through files on his laptop. It looks like 3 cases resulted in collected fines. The other 12 were dropped or resulted in compliance without fines. So the HOA spent $15,000 to collect what in fines? About $2,000 total. I let that sink in. We spent $15,000 to collect $2,000. That seems like poor fiscal management. The point isn't profit, Deborah snapped. The point is maintaining community standards. At what cost? Those legal fees come from our HOA dues. That's our money being spent to harass residents over minor issues. If residents simply complied with clearly stated rules, there would be no legal fees. Or maybe if the HOA focused on actual community needs instead of measuring fence heights and counting snow piles, we'd all be better off. The meeting devolved from there. Deborah tried to maintain order, but other residents started speaking up, sharing their own complaints. By the end, it was clear that there was a growing discontent with her leadership. As we filed out, Marcus clapped me on the shoulder. Dude, you just declared war. She declared war when she called the cops on me at 7 in the morning. Fair point, but watch your back. Deborah doesn't forget. He was right. Over the next week, I received 3 more violation notices. One claimed my mailbox was faded and needed repainting. Another said my trash bins had been visible from the street outside of approved hours. The third stated that my doormat, which had been fine for 2 years, was now considered non-compliant with aesthetic standards. Each violation came with a fine. Each fine was documented and sent to Sarah, who was building quite a file. She's retaliating, Sarah said during our phone call. This is actually good for us. It shows malicious intent and selective enforcement. Keep documenting everything and don't pay any of these fines. My property is going to end up with a lien. Let her try. By the time this is done, she's going to regret ever hearing your name. But the harassment wasn't just limited to official violations. Someone started spreading rumors that I was behind in my dues, which wasn't true. Someone else posted in the community Facebook group that I was being investigated for property damage, also false. The posts were anonymous, but I knew they were coming from Deborah or her allies. Olivia was getting worried. This is escalating. Maybe you should just pay the original fine and move on. It's not about the money anymore. It's about the principle. Principles are great until they consume your life. You've been obsessing over this for weeks. She was right, but I couldn't let it go. Every new violation notice felt like a personal attack. Every rumor felt like a punch in the gut. I lay awake at night imagining confrontations with Deborah, perfectly crafted speeches about justice and fairness. It was Marcus who suggested I look into running for HOA president myself. The election's in 4 months. If you hate how she runs things, run against her. Nobody runs against her. She ruins them. So don't give her ammunition. You're documenting everything. You're following all the rules despite her bogus violations, and you're building support with other residents. You could actually win. The idea took root. I started talking to more neighbors, not just about my snow pile, but about what they wanted from the HOA. Better snow removal on common areas, more community events, transparent budgeting, reasonable enforcement of reasonable rules. The response was enthusiastic. People were tired of living in fear of violation notices. They were tired of feeling like they were under constant surveillance. They wanted a neighborhood that felt like a community, not a prison camp. I officially announced my candidacy in early March, as the last of the winter snow was melting. Deborah's response was swift and predictable. Within days, I received a violation notice claiming that my announcement post in the community Facebook group violated HOA rules about political campaigning. Sarah laughed when I told her. She can't restrict political speech. That's a First Amendment issue. She just handed you more ammunition. The next HOA meeting was packed. Word had spread that there was finally going to be a real election, and residents showed up to see what would happen. The community clubhouse, which usually held maybe 10 people for meetings, had over 50 crammed inside. Deborah tried to maintain control, but the meeting quickly turned into an open forum about her leadership. Person after person stood up to share their stories. The woman who'd been fined for having the wrong shade of mulch. The man who'd been threatened with legal action because his teenager's car was parked on the street overnight. The couple who'd been harassed for months over a Halloween decoration that stayed up 2 days past the approved date. Throughout it all, Deborah sat stone-faced, her jaw clenched tight. When she finally spoke, her voice was ice. If residents have concerns about HOA governance, the proper channel is written complaints to the board, not public grandstanding. We've tried written complaints, someone shouted. You ignore them. That's not true. All complaints are reviewed and then dismissed. The meeting ended with no resolution, but the battle lines were drawn. Deborah had her supporters, mostly people who'd benefited from her enforcement of rules against others. But I had a growing coalition of residents who were simply tired of living under her thumb. The campaign was exhausting. I created a platform focusing on transparent governance, reasonable rule enforcement, and building community rather than policing it. I went door to door, attending neighborhood gatherings and posting regularly in the community Facebook group. Deborah fought back with everything she had. She sent mailers highlighting her experience and stability, painting me as a troublemaker who wanted to eliminate all standards. She implied that without strict enforcement, property values would plummet and the neighborhood would descend into chaos. She also continued issuing violation notices. In the 2 months leading up to the election, I received 8 more notices for various alleged infractions. Sarah was thrilled, calling it the most blatant case of retaliation I've seen in years. But it was wearing on me. Every day brought new stress, new accusations, new battles. The snow pile, ironically, had long since melted. Spring had arrived in Minneapolis, bringing green grass and blooming flowers. But the fight that had started over that pile of snow had taken on a life of its own. The election was held on a Saturday in May at the community clubhouse. Turnout was unprecedented. 71 of the 84 homeowners showed up to vote. The atmosphere was tense, with Deborah's supporters clustering on one side of the room and mine on the other. The vote was by secret ballot. Gary, the treasurer, counted them with 2 witnesses. The process took 20 minutes that felt like hours. Finally, Gary stood up, looking nervous. The results are 43 votes for Ian Bradford, 26 votes for Deborah Henderson, and 2 abstentions. Ian Bradford is the new HOA president. The room erupted. My supporters cheered. Deborah's face went from red to white to purple. She stood abruptly, grabbed her purse, and stormed out without a word. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt exhausted. Marcus hugged me. Other neighbors congratulated me, but all I could think about was the massive amount of work ahead. I'd won the battle, but now I had to actually govern. The transition was rocky. Deborah refused to turn over records, claiming she needed time to organize them. It took 3 weeks and another letter from Sarah to finally get the files. When I started reviewing them, I understood why she'd been reluctant. The financial records were a mess, expenses that didn't match up with invoices, payments to vendors that I couldn't verify, and most troubling, a series of charges to Patterson and Associates, the HOA's law firm that seemed excessive even by the standards Sarah had already questioned. I scheduled a meeting with Gary, who'd stayed on as treasurer. We spread the files across my dining room table and started going through everything line by line. I tried to bring some of this up to Deborah, Gary said quietly, but she always had explanations. She said I didn't understand how HOA accounting worked. Did you believe her? He looked miserable. I wanted to. I didn't want to think she was doing anything wrong, but some of these expenses never made sense to me. We found it buried in the legal fees. Patterson and Associates had been billing the HOA not just for violation disputes, but for consulting services. These consulting fees totaled over $30,000 over the past 3 years, but there was no documentation of what these consultations were for. I called Sarah. I think we have a problem. She came over that evening and reviewed everything. Her expression grew darker as she went through the files. This is bad. Either the law firm was padding their bills, or someone was paying them for services that weren't actually performed. You think Deborah was stealing? I think we need to bring in a forensic accountant. And possibly the police. The next day, I filed a report with the Minneapolis Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit. The detective assigned to the case was a woman named Lisa Chen who'd seen plenty of HOA disputes turn criminal. It's more common than you'd think, she told me in her office. HOA presidents have access to funds with minimal oversight. If the board isn't paying attention, it's easy to hide irregularities. The investigation took 2 months. During that time, I tried to run the HOA the way I'd promised, transparently, fairly, and with an emphasis on community. I held monthly meetings that were actually collaborative. We organized a neighborhood barbecue. We revised the violation process to focus on serious issues rather than petty complaints, but the investigation hung over everything. Word had spread about the irregularities, and the neighborhood was divided between those who believed Deborah had done something wrong and those who thought I was conducting a witch hunt against a dedicated public servant. In July, Detective Chen called me. "Can you come to the station? We have some findings to discuss." I brought Sarah with me. In a small conference room, Detective Chen laid out what they'd found. The forensic accountant had traced approximately $47,000 in questionable transactions over a 4-year period. The consulting fees to Patterson and Associates were legitimate bills, but for services that had nothing to do with the HOA. The law firm had been doing estate planning work for Deborah personally, and she'd been having the HOA pay for it. There were other irregularities, too. A landscaping company that had billed the HOA but had no record of performing work. Equipment purchases that never appeared in HOA inventory. Small amounts here and there that added up to a significant theft. "We're charging her with theft by swindle and embezzlement," Detective Chen said. "She'll be arrested tomorrow." The arrest made the local news. "Suburban HOA president charged with embezzlement" was the headline in the Minneapolis Star-Tribune. The story detailed the charges and included quotes from residents. Some expressed shock. Others, like Marcus, told reporters they weren't surprised. Deborah's arraignment was brief. She pleaded not guilty, posted bail, and hired a prominent criminal defense attorney. The HOA was listed as a victim in the case, which felt surreal. The organization she'd ruled over for years was now prosecuting her. The legal process moved slowly. Months passed with hearings and motions and negotiations. The HOA hired its own attorney to pursue civil recovery of the stolen funds. Deborah's house, 3 doors down from mine, sat mostly dark. She rarely left, and when she did, she avoided eye contact with everyone. I felt no joy in her downfall. What I felt was tired. The entire situation had consumed nearly a year of my life. The snow pile that had started everything was a distant memory, replaced by legal documents and financial records and criminal proceedings. Olivia and I got engaged in September. I'd finally bought the ring, though it took a while to rebuild my savings after the legal fees. We talked about moving, starting fresh somewhere without HOA drama, but decided to stay. The neighborhood felt different now, lighter. People actually talked to each other without fear of violation notices. Kids played in yards without parents worrying about toys being left out. In November, Deborah took a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to felony theft and was sentenced to 2 years probation, 500 hours of community service, and full restitution to the HOA. The criminal penalties could have been worse, but the prosecutor noted her lack of prior record and her cooperation in identifying all the irregularities. The civil case settled for the full amount stolen, plus legal fees. Deborah had to sell her house to pay it. She moved out in December, and I watched from my window as the moving truck carried away her furniture and her life. A family with young kids bought the house. Their moving day was loud and chaotic, with children running around and friends helping carry boxes. The new neighbors, Tom and Sarah Williams, came by to introduce themselves a few days later. "We heard there was some drama with the previous owner," Tom said carefully. "There was, but it's resolved now. Welcome to the neighborhood. We were nervous about living in an HOA." Our realtor said this one was pretty strict. "It was," I said. "We're working on changing that, making it more about community and less about enforcement." They seemed relieved. Their kids became fast friends with other children on the street. Within weeks, it was like the Williams had always been there, while Deborah's 6-year reign faded into uncomfortable memory. I served out my term as HOA president and chose not to run for re-election. I'd accomplished what I'd wanted: reform the organization and end the culture of fear. The new president was a woman named Jennifer Martinez, no relation to Officer Martinez, who shared my philosophy of light-touch governance. On a cold morning in January, exactly a year after Deborah had called the police on my snow pile, I stood in my driveway with a shovel. Fresh snow had fallen overnight, and I needed to clear it. As I worked, I carefully piled the snow in the exact same spot I had the previous year, along my property line. Marcus walked by walking his dog and laughed. "You're not going to start the whole thing over again, are you?" "Just exercising my property rights," I said with a grin. "That's a much smaller pile this year. Less snow, and besides, I don't need to make a statement anymore," he nodded. "True. Hey, Jennifer's talking about organizing a winter festival in the common area. Ice sculptures, hot chocolate, the whole thing. You interested in helping?" "Yeah, that sounds great." As Marcus walked on, I leaned on my shovel and looked around the neighborhood. Kids were building a snowman in the Williams yard. Someone down the street was stringing lights on their porch, well past the old approved date for winter decorations. A teenager's car sat parked on the street overnight, all things that would have generated violation notices a year ago. Now they were just normal parts of neighborhood life. Officer Martinez drove by on patrol and waved. I waved back. He told me once, months ago, that calls from Riverside Meadows had dropped by 80% since Deborah's arrest. The police department was grateful. I finished clearing my driveway and went inside. Olivia was making breakfast, and the smell of coffee and bacon filled the house. We were planning our wedding for June, a small ceremony in the community clubhouse that Jennifer had enthusiastically approved. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah, the lawyer. Restitution payment received. Case officially closed. Congrats on putting this behind you. I smiled and set the phone down. Behind me was right. The snow pile, the investigation, the election, the criminal case, all of it was finally done. What lay ahead was a wedding, a life with Olivia, and a neighborhood that actually felt like a community. Looking out the kitchen window at the snow-covered street, I thought about how one woman's need for control had spiraled into criminal charges. How a simple pile of snow had exposed a much larger problem. How sometimes standing your ground over something small could lead to significant change. The snow pile was long gone, melted and absorbed into the ground. But what it had started, the transformation it had sparked, remained. Riverside Meadows wasn't perfect, but it was better. More human. Less afraid. And that, more than any legal victory or election win, felt like success. Deborah Henderson had called the police on my snow pile one winter morning, setting in motion a chain of events neither of us could have predicted. Officer Martinez had confirmed the pile was entirely on my property line, a simple fact that should have ended the matter right there. Instead, it had become the first domino in a series that led to criminal charges, a federal case, and fundamental change in how our neighborhood governed itself. Sometimes I wondered what would have happened if I'd just moved the snow that first day. If I'd backed down, paid the fine, accepted Deborah's authority. Would she still be running the HOA, still terrorizing residents over minor infractions? Would she have eventually been caught stealing, or would it have continued unchecked? I'd never know. And it didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that I'd stood my ground. I'd fought back against unreasonable authority. And while the process had been exhausting, expensive, and often infuriating, it had been worth it. The spring, after everything ended, we planted a tree in the common area. A memorial, Jennifer said, not to Deborah's downfall but to the community's renewal. Every resident was invited to help, and dozens showed up with shovels and smiles. As I helped pack dirt around the young oak's roots, I thought about roots of a different kind. The roots I'd put down in this neighborhood, the connections I'd made, the stand I'd taken. 2 years earlier, I'd been just another homeowner trying to avoid HOA trouble. Now I was part of something larger, a community that had learned to stand together. Marcus stood beside me, his kids running around with the Williams children. "Think we'll ever have drama like that again?" he asked. "God, I hope not. Me too. But if we do, at least now we know how to handle it." He was right. The experience had taught us all something valuable, that bad leadership thrives in silence, that small acts of resistance matter, that communities are stronger when they stand together rather than living in fear. The tree, a northern red oak chosen for its hardiness in Minnesota winters, would grow tall over the years. By the time it was fully mature, I hoped, the drama of the snow pile and Deborah Henderson would be a funny story we told at neighborhood barbecues. Remember when the HOA president called the cops over snow? Remember when she got arrested for embezzlement? Remember when Ian ran for president and actually won? Stories that would fade with time, becoming legend more than memory. But the lessons would remain. The precedents we'd set for fair governance. The expectation of transparency in HOA finances. The understanding that rules should serve the community, not the other way around. Olivia joined me as the tree planting wrapped up. She'd been my rock through everything, listening to my rants, calming my anger, reminding me when to fight and when to let go. The engagement ring sparkled on her finger in the spring sunlight. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "How a pile of snow changed everything," she laughed. "Only you could turn winter yard maintenance into a philosophical moment. It's a gift." We walked home hand in hand, past houses where people lived without fear of their HOA. Past yards with decorations that might not be regulation, but brought joy to their owners. Past neighbors who waved and smiled instead of looking over their shoulders. The snow pile was gone, melted into memory and legend. But what it represented, the willingness to stand up for what's right, even over something small, would last far longer than any winter storm. And really, that was the point all along.